Well, as you now know, I'm Derek Mowbray, and I am in the business of preventing stress. So if you're already stressed, I'm not interested. What I am interested, though, is in preventing you from experiencing the events and behaviors which can trigger off stressful reactions, particularly at work. And the way in which I do that is to advise organizations about the culture, leadership, working environment, and indeed the development of personal resilience in order to create the environment which prevents these events from occurring. And it's perfectly possible for us to do that because the workplace is a controlled community. It's controlled by people like you and me, people who are leaders and managers, and it's within our gift to actually create the workplace as a fabulous place to work. There's nothing stopping us. It's just a matter of attitude and understanding the triggers that can make it happen. Now, the workplace is a controlled community, and so unlike communities outside of the workplace, like home life and neighborhoods, which are pretty chaotic if they're anything like mine. And so what I'm interested in is trying to help leaders and managers understand what the issues are and then provide the means by which they can change their organization. So what is the elephant in the room? Well, it's people coming to work in body but not in mind. UK has had a flat productivity since 2008. The Bank of England doesn't know why. It puts in all sorts of different things to do to try and perk things up. But in actual fact, it's probably due to things like fear. People are experiencing degrees of stress, and I'll explain that. Psychopresenteeism, which is people who are at work in body but not in mind. And also this sort of sensation of corporate depression, this blunted sense of motivation, of just simply turning up and going home after the day's work. This is the challenge. This is hugely expensive, and this is what we should be aiming at in order to change and turn it on its head. Why should we do it? Well, these things really impede people's concentration. And concentration is what performance is all about. So these events, if you like, or the events which create fear and stress are the major impediments to individual psychological well-being as well as their performance. The first thing to remember is that employment is a relationship. It's a relationship between the employer and the employee, normally based on some sort of formal contract. But the more important contract that it's based on is what is known as the psychological contract, which Joy mentioned before. This is this unwritten and often incomprehensible contract where the employee bases their relationship on the employer on the concept of fairness and reasonableness. And when you think about your own situation at work, and you think about the times when you've felt like, well, sod it, I'm not going to do this, it'll be because someone has treated you in an unfair and unreasonable way. You may not have articulated this in any sort of way, but you will have felt it and you will have started to disengage. And it's that which really causes underperformance. And it's that I think we need to be addressing. We perhaps need to make more overt what constitutes the psychological contract. So the psychological contract is all about this unwritten relationship. What is psychological well-being? Well, it's how you feel. It's not about how you are. It's a personal feeling. And the problem with it is that if you ask someone how you're feeling, we generally reply in terms of, well, what we expect the other person to want to hear, not actually how we are genuinely feeling. And that's largely due to this widespread concept and phenomenon of fear. Fear is permeating just about every relationship we have in conventional organizations. And it's something that we've really got to get rid of somehow, and I'm going to be telling you how. Performance, all about concentration. You can have all the skills, knowledge, experience in the world, but a total waste of time if you can't concentrate. So what we need to do in the workplace is to create an environment where people are persuaded, if not provoked, to be able to concentrate for periods of time so that they can complete tasks effectively without any interference. Now, physical interference is relatively easy to deal with. You can switch off your email, switch off the telephone, tell someone to go away and not interrupt you. But it's the interference with our mental state which is much more tricky, and it's that which I'm going to be focusing on. The big problem, as we know, is stress. Stress is endemic. If it was a physical condition, of course, we would be doing fantastic things about it. It would be at pandemic levels. But in fact, because it's hidden, we tend to somehow accept it. It's got a rotten press. It's a term that's used so liberally that quite a lot of people I know just dismiss it as irrelevant. So it's important to understand what it is. And on the screen is a definition. It's an extreme adverse psychological response to individual perception of uncontrollable pressure, tension, and strain. And it's serious. People with genuine stress wouldn't be here. Your memory is shot. You feel as though flu symptoms. You want to hibernate. You simply, as it were, extract yourself from the environment. And of course, you never fully recover. And if you have genuine stress and you don't deal with it properly, and someone will have to help you to do that, it can lead to some of the most dangerous physical conditions that we've got. So most people at work don't have stress. So it's important to understand that stress is at the end of a continuum which starts with pressure. Pressure is a stimulant. Your hormones of cortisol and adrenaline pump around your body, and you will know that your concentration is intensified. And if you're under pressure, your performance rises. But it only rises insofar as you keep control of the pressure, if you know the pressure is coming to an end. If you don't, you might deteriorate into tension. Tension is also a stimulant. It's a stimulant because we feel tense. And feeling tense is a very uncomfortable sensation. We don't like it. In fact, we loathe it. Indeed, coming up to talk to you, for example, I might feel tense, and therefore I want to get rid of that sensation by starting promptly and getting on with it. So we do anything we can to get rid of the sensation of tension. But if we can't, we deteriorate into something called strain. And strain is when we start to think of the reasons for our feelings. We start thinking about that bus driver that's stopping us from getting to a meeting. Or we start thinking about the person who's putting the demands on us. And if we can't bring strain into control, we deteriorate into stress, which is a catastrophe. Now, pressure and tension we want. We want people to work under degrees of pressure and tension because that heightens concentration. But we only want that insofar as individuals can control that. Because if you can't, then of course you deteriorate and then you start to underperform. So the sort of organizational aspects of things which relate to these different degrees of stress, if you like, are these. We want people to work in the green zone. So we've got some headlines there, and behind the headlines, of course, there are a lot of activities. But if you've got all of these in place, then the prospects are pretty high that you'll achieve what is known as social engagement. Social engagement is the most important engagement you can have. It's characterized by vigor, absorption, and intensive attachment. All other forms of engagement are less intensive than that, so we're really looking for social engagement. But what tends to happen is that people will deteriorate down into the red zone, and you've got a whole lot of headings under the red zone. And any organizations that have a proliferation of these headings are highly likely to have people coming to work in body but not in mind. And it's people in the red zone who actually need to have resilience. Now, resilience is flexible strength of mind. Now, for some people, of course, it all becomes too much, and despite having policies, procedures, occupational health, EAPs, all your rewards and everything else will escape. They'll escape because they can't tolerate it anymore. The price of all this is massive. The conventional price is about twice the combined cost of sickness, absence, and turnover attributable to psychological distress, but some recent research would indicate it's up to 5 times, and the NHS recent staff survey said 61% of all staff over a 3-month period could not discharge their jobs properly. In other words, they were present in body but not in mind. It's a massive expenditure, and it's to be addressed on economic terms as well as performance terms. So what causes all of this? Well, it's all about feeling in control. That's been mentioned before, but it's absolutely the key. You can have all these categories, and the HSE categories, for example, are well known, but actually to individuals, it's about whether we feel as though we're in charge of things, whether we're on top of it, whether we've got clarity of mind, whether we feel as though we can deal with things voluntarily. So it's all about our capacity to feel in control. And when we feel as though things are uncontrollable, that's when we start to wonder and start to have feelings and slightly distressful. You start to become anxious and sometimes depressed. And if that becomes even more developed, then you deteriorate down into strain. So the sort of things to try and start preventing stress from occurring in the first place is to have a look at the risks which organizations face. Now, I said that organizations are controlled communities. Therefore, most of the risks that organizations face perhaps could be controlled. There are some that may not be controlled, and therefore, what do you do with uncontrollable risks? You try to control them. You make multiple scenarios of options should the risk turn into reality. So there are many things which organizations can actually do to mitigate the risk from turning into actual events and difficult behaviors. So these are some of the fairly routine risks which organizations face, and you might actually recognize some of them. We've got to stop those from turning into actual threats. And the good thing about risks is that we've got time to do that. That's why risk analysis is really important, because they haven't happened yet. And therefore, we've got the opportunity to really think through what we're going to do with all of these risks before they actually may turn into an actual event. So the actual events that we experience at work are all these. So just have a quick butchers at all this lot and see whether in fact you've experienced any of them yourselves. Hands up the one person in the world who hasn't. The tragedy is these are all created by us. The positive thing is we can stop them. And that's what we should be doing. The cost is huge in terms of human misery, in terms of performance, in terms of money. There's nothing to stop us from preventing almost all of these. There are some of these which are quite spontaneous. For example, genuine bereavement might be difficult to stop, but actually bereavement sensations aren't. They occur equally as much when you lose your team members, when they move to some part of your business or something of that sort. Okay, so what are we going to do about it all? All of this suggests there's a huge people management vacuum. The first thing we've got to do is to really have a framework. And this framework is one which I developed in around 1990. It's been used all over the place as being the beginning of working out how to deal with the problem. It's got 4 parts. One is about prevention, which I'm talking about. The second is about preventing deterioration. So when people who are experiencing events and difficult behaviors, we need to stop them in their tracks from experiencing something which is going to underperform, for them to underperform. And that's where resilience comes in. Restoration is when people are experiencing a genuine stress, maybe between tension and strain, may even go off work, and therefore need to get back into work, and that is known as bouncing back. Bouncing back is restoration. It's not part of resilience itself. And palliation is the 4th one. For people who've been off sick for 6 weeks or longer, require specialist rehabilitation in order to come back to work because they've got the additional added psychological problem of isolation. So starting with a framework like that, most organizations I know have got perhaps 2 out of the 4 strategies in place and haven't got a genuine prevention one. And I'm going to be talking about that. We need to, in the end, have organizations where people behave with these features. We want people to feel commitment. In other words, really attached to the organization itself. We want them to feel trust, which is the absence of second-guessing the motivation of other people. So you don't spend any time thinking about why you've been asked to do anything or why it is the boss is doing this or someone's doing that. You actually take everyone at face value. Motivation is the marriage between you being open to being enticed to do something and something enticing you to do it. So, for example, I'm open to work, but I certainly wouldn't be enticed by an accountancy firm, that sort of thing. So it's a marriage between the 2 sorts of enticement. We want people to feel this sense of kinship, which is sharing the fact that we're actually in this team together and we're going to work with each other, we're going to share problems, solutions, successes, failures, everything else, because we're actually in it together. And we want people to be able to concentrate. In other words, if you find yourself in a situation where you can't, you take yourself off in order to find some place that you can. But we want the place designed, we want the workplace designed so that we can concentrate. And all of this adds up to social engagement, this sense of real commitment to the organization characterized by vibrancy, dedication, and absorption. In other words, getting out of bed in the morning and running to work because the workplace is such a fantastic place to be. And there's absolutely no reason why it shouldn't be for everyone. So what does such a culture look like? Well, have a look at this. Good, you're all fast readers, that's fantastic. So in order to try and create a culture like that, we've got to work out what it is that managers are supposed to do in all this, because they're the controllers. Well, they're supposed to do something that they don't do now. At least not many. They're supposed to get the best out of people. The best possible performance. In order to do justice to the individual's investment in their own intelligence, their own curiosity, their own skills, knowledge, and experience. And I've only got 5 minutes, so this is a rush. Okay? And we also expect managers to get the best out of themselves. Only 30% of managers have been trained in anything in the UK, and most are project managers, therefore technical, and don't like people. That is the problem that needs to be fixed, because organizations of people and people who are appointed to lead and manage them are all coming from technical backgrounds who actually don't necessarily like people. And we've got a huge problem of fixing that. And no amount of benefits and support and everything else will overcome that problem. That is the problem that we need to fix. And once we've got managers and leaders who understand that, their task is to create the conditions within which people can thrive. First thing to do is to put the workforce at the center of everything. Most managers and boards of directors that I know of, and I know an awful lot, like the stuff in the periphery. Why? They're not people. They're all measurements. It's difficult to measure people, but put them at the center of everything, and everything else will flow. The next thing we need is another framework of having inputs. Input in behaviors up on the top right-hand side, which are then embedded in the organization, produce the output behaviors that I've already mentioned. There are two principles to be able to do this. One is the principle of psychological responsibility, which is a responsibility that every individual has to ensure that they maintain their own psychological well-being. They don't depend on anybody else to do it, they do it for themselves. So that means that when they're under some sort of indication that they're going to feel distressed in any way, they say so. The atmosphere is one which allows people to actually judge for themselves whether they're going to be performing at their peak. The second part of psychological responsibility is to do no harm to anybody else. So that means thinking about your behavior towards other people, thinking about the email, the way in which you address other people and communicate with them. The second principle is sharing responsibility for future success with everyone. Completely different to conventional way of managing organization. But the most successful organizations around the world do this. The most successful teams around the world do this. And it's based on the premise that the combined intelligence of the workforce is far superior to the intelligence of its leaders and managers. And you think about it because it's true. And if you can start the process of sharing responsibility for future success with everyone, you get all sorts of stimulating ideas and involvement with what's going on. So let's just have a look at sharing responsibility. In organizations, you would have a situation where elephants in the room are raised and dealt with, and so whistleblowing would now become history, because we would expect people to blow the whistle all the time and encourage people to think about how to improve the organization constantly. I have less than 2 minutes. The well-being and performance agenda itself is the way in which these two principles are embedded into the organization. It's made up of these 4 principal activities: developing a culture, the type of leadership, making sure that the adaptive working environment supports concentration. So when your computer goes down, people fix it fast because you need to have it to concentrate, that sort of thing. Ergonomics, health, physical health, and everything else comes into that. And we also need the adaptive and resilient individual because things do happen. If you get the well-being and performance agenda in place in its entirety, your performance goes through the roof. So, adaptive leadership, focus on the organization, not on management. Managers have been a complete failure in terms of well-being and performance. So let's get the workforce focusing on what's important, which is the success of the organization, not on its management. Then we can start thinking about sharing responsibility genuinely, dealing with elephants, encouraging independent judgment, and you will discover that leadership capacity is automatically expanded. You need to have some cultural rules within the organization to make this happen. And here are a load of rules, and I've run out of time, isn't this? I can see the thing coming up. Yeah, great. All of these you will recognize, but they all have to be assessed against the criteria of whether they produce commitment, trust, motivation, kinship, concentration, and social engagement. Thank you.